Our first presentation today is a 2022 Flight Software Workshop keynote by David Hitt, an author and strategic communicator and co-author of Homesteading Space, the Skylab Story. David Hitt is the co-author of two books, Homesteading Space, written with astronauts Owen Garriott and Joe Kerwin, and Bold They Rise, the Space Shuttle Early Years, both part of the University of Nebraska Press's Ordway Award-winning Outward Odyssey Spaceflight History Series. He has also appeared in the award-winning documentaries Searching for Skylab and Saving Skylab. David is presenting almost everything I need to know about going to Mars I learned from Skylab, and we're very happy to have him with us here today. David, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. I didn't realize I was wearing my bio picture outfit in the for the presentation today. It's a bit of a faux pas, but it is a pleasure to be here today. It is a pleasure to be here today, as I'm sure everyone knows, is the 48th anniversary of the splashdown of the final Skylab crew. So I think it's a wonderful tribute that you planned the workshop around the anniversary, and it's a pleasure to be here talking on this hallowed date. It is an honor to be here, man. Getting the keynote list and seeing that I had Hans Koenigsmann as my opening act. That's when you know you have made it. But it's also a privilege to be here today. It's a privilege to be here today. I got the invitation to speak at this event. Normally, given the opportunity to talk about Skylab, jump on it without hesitation. This time I had to write back and say, hey, look, I don't intimidate easily, but I'm a little intimidated by this one. This is an audience that way outclasses me. Flight software, I know as the animus that brings the golem to life. This is you do the magic that makes the machines alive. And so I'm not going. Don't ask questions about the Skylab flight software because I am woefully incompetent to answer them. But so it's a privilege to be talking to this group today. And planning the talk, I said, well, hey, look, I've got a talk that I give to educators at Space Camp every year called "Everything I Need to Know About Going to Mars I Learned from Skylab." And obviously, for an audience like this, that's woefully inadequate. I need to bump the technical level up a little bit. So I did. Next slide. So today we're doing the far more accurate, almost everything I need to know about going to Mars I learned from Skylab. Before we leave the title slide, one other note I need to make the lawyers happy. Next slide. In my bio on the side, it kind of talks about other things that I've done today. I'm here strictly as author David Hitt. I am no one else. Any opinions I express are purely mine, no other organization, and likely those of absolutely nobody else. So let's get started. Next slide. So like I said, today is the 48th anniversary of the end of the crewed program of the Skylab program. Of course, it made news a little bit more 5 years after that when it came in July 11th, 1979. But what that means is, normally when I'm giving this talk, like I said, normally I'm giving this talk to teachers that are going back to their classroom after a week at space camp, talking to them about a program that happened before, gosh, almost everybody in the room was born, and that includes myself. I was born the year following the end of the Skylab program. So why do we care, right? You know, depending on who you are, people have some degree of familiarity with Skylab, some degree of what it was. This is our the first U.S. space station, launched in May of 1973, crewed by 3 crews, one for about a month, one for about 2 months, one for almost 3 months. The program ended, like I said, 48 years ago today in 1974. Did an entire battery of microgravity science, heliophysics, materials science, biomedical, and then it came down. And then it came down, and it's another 7 years before the United States, or, well, that's not true. There's the Apollo-Soyuz program the following year, but after that, it's not until 1981 before the United States starts venturing into space again. It's a total of 24 years between the end of Skylab and the launch of the first modules of the International Space Station. So why do we care? Why do we care? And Skylab today tends to get forgotten a little bit. It's not as appreciated. You know, it's kind of sandwiched between the moon landings to the left of it that were kind of sexy. You know, there's still a little bit of a talk about the Apollo moon landings. Sandwiched between the space shuttle to the right of it. The space shuttle, of course, flew for 30 years, changed the way we think about space flight. And between the two, there's this little Skylab program that kind of almost ends up being a footnote. So why do we care? And I will make the argument that Skylab gets forgotten because it was too successful. Skylab gets forgotten. Skylab gets underappreciated because it's easy to take it for granted, because we today forget that there was a time when we didn't know the things that Skylab taught us. It's kind of hard to remember today that there was a time when we had to learn the lessons that we learned from Skylab. So bringing it not only relevant to today, but let's make it relevant to the future. Let's make it relevant to this whole exploration thing, going back to the moon, going on to Mars. What can we learn from Skylab that will help us as we go further out into the solar system? So, number one, use what you got. Number two, you can live there. Number three, there's stuff to do. Number four, you can fix things. Now, side note, when I do this presentation for the teachers, I add a 0.5, which is, it's nice to have a big rocket. Usually gets a couple of snickers from some of the teachers. We're going to skip that one today and kind of dig into the meat of these other four. So let's go. Next slide, please. Use what you got, right? So the idea of a space station goes back to long before human spaceflight was even a serious thing, right? If you're going to go to space, space is kind of a hostile environment, right? Space left to its own devices will kill you instantly. So if you're going to go and we're going to explore this thing and we're going to live in this thing, you've got to have a house in space, right? If you want to be there for any amount of time. And so what do we call that thing? Well, we're going to call it a space station. And so as the idea of human spaceflight developed, the idea of a space station developed in the late 1950s and the very early 1960s. As we're beginning the human spaceflight program, the idea is, if you want to be a spacefaring people, if you want to go to other worlds, if you want to go to the moon, if you want to go to Mars, step one is you develop the capability to go into space, right? Step two is, well, if you've got the capability to go into space, you need the capability to stay there, to live there. You need a space station. Once you've done that, step three is, if you want to go other places, if you want to go to the moon, if you want to go to Mars, you use your capability to get into space to go to your space station, and you use that as a waypoint to go out to other worlds. It makes sense. This is the way you do it. So what happens is, back in 1971, the United States launches Alan Shepard into space. He gets about 15 minutes of spaceflight experience, and a couple of weeks after that, based on those 15 minutes, the President of the United States goes before Congress and says that he feels really confident that I believe this nation should commit itself to the goal before the decade is out of landing a man on the moon and bringing him safely home. Okay, well that's exciting. That's a lofty goal. That's an ambitious goal. But it changes the way that this is being done. It makes it a crash course. We have to do this. We have to do it rapidly. How do you do it rapidly? Well, the easiest way is let's just eliminate step two. We're going to develop the ability to go into space, and we're going to go to the moon. We're going to skip that whole space station step. So that's what happens. That becomes the plan. That's the way you see the Apollo program unfold. But even as that's happening, the idea of the space station isn't forgotten. The folks who have been championing it all along still want to see that happen. But how do you do that? Going to the moon, it turns out, is difficult. Going to the moon, it turns out, is expensive. So if you're spending the money to go to the moon, where do you find the money to go to develop also in parallel a space station? And the answer is, these systems that are being developed to go to the moon, they are very robust systems. They're very powerful systems. They're very capable systems. What if we modified that and we used that to build our space station? So that becomes the driving philosophy for Skylab. Next slide. Why does that matter? Why do we care? Because if you're paying attention to the news at all today, that's how we're going to get back to the moon. That's how we're going to go to Mars. Certainly you see that, as we're speaking today, the Artemis 1 launch of NASA Space Launch System is coming soon and very soon, knock on wood. if you're following that program at all, there's some of that use what you got mentality there. Let's take the the booster technology from the space shuttle. Let's take the SSMEs from the space shuttle. Let's take these capabilities. Let's repurpose them. Let's use them as a stepping stone to get closer to where we're going. But that philosophy kind of permeates the whole idea. Yesterday, I believe, was the 4th anniversary of the first launch of the Falcon Heavy. This is a capability that exists. It wasn't designed by NASA for this exploration program, but man, if this is a capability that exists, how do we use that? And so, we're seeing the launches of the launch of the first gateway elements being scheduled to fly on the Falcon Heavy. Let's take the capabilities that we have and let's use them to get closer to where we're going. Next slide. So this was that was in general the sweeping arc of how Skylab was developed based on that use what you got philosophy. The slide over there, the flip chart rather over there on the left was a hand-drawn drawing that's kind of the Magna Carta of Skylab. George Miller, who was the head of human spaceflight for NASA at the time, came to Huntsville, drew a picture on a flip chart. There'd been a lot of discussion about what is this Skylab going to be? What does it entail? What are the elements of it? Miller drew this little sketch, said, there's your marching orders, go build one of those. The one of those that he drew, not quite what was built. At the time, he was still assuming that it was going to be launched on multiple Saturn I rockets instead of one Saturn V. So the idea was it was going to be launched modularly. But you tie those things together and you've got a Skylab. So you've got a workshop that's built from the 3rd stage of a Saturn V rocket. The Saturn V S4B stage becomes the Skylab orbital workshop. It becomes the core of the Skylab station. At the time, the Apollo telescope mount, the powerful heliophysics and astronomy observatory mounted on Skylab, was going to be a free-flying element. It was going to be literally tethered. It was going to be launched separately and then literally tethered, tied to the workshop. As a result, it's derived from the Apollo lunar lander. The moon lander used for the first moon landings becomes the basis of the telescope for Skylab. We have the Gemini capsules. If we're going to fly this space station, we need the ability to go outside. We need an airlock. We need a hatch. They literally took a leftover Gemini hatch and used that as the hatch for the Skylab airlock module. So very much built on this philosophy of use what you've got. Next slide. You can live there. Right? Again, this is one of those things that we take for granted. Today we have a space station, human beings living and working in space every moment of every day for the past 21 years. Of course, you can live there, but before Skylab, space was never the destination, right? I'm going to go to an airport next week. I'm going to get on an airplane, and people are going to ask, "Hey, where are you going?" And you can go to the airport. You can, people that are getting ready to get on planes, you can ask them where they're going, and nobody will ever say the sky, right? It's technically true. You're going to get in this big metal bird. It's going to take you to the sky. And then from there, it'll touch down at some point and it'll be in another place. But everybody talks about that other place. You never talk about the sky. You never talk about the medium that you're passing through. You always talk about the destination. For Mercury, for Gemini, for Apollo, the destination was the moon. I mean, even those early steps that are just going into Earth orbit, they're not literally going to the moon, but the destination was always the moon. Space was the medium that you pass through on your way somewhere else. So Skylab becomes the first time that the sky becomes the destination. Skylab, we are going to the medium. We are going to the highway. We are going to the place that you pass through on your way somewhere else, but we're going there for its own merits. So because of that, Skylab is the first time that we're spending time in the void of space. The chart there at the bottom kind of illustrates that. I told you the final crew was up there for 84 days, far longer than any human being had been prior to that. We've got to learn to live there. Next slide. Why do we care? Why does it matter? Because again, if we're serious about going to other worlds, we have got to learn to live in space. even the International Space Station, even all the experience that we've built up there. You know, we've got Mark Vande Hei up there right now, just past the 300-day mark in the last week, living in space longer than any American has, other than Scott Kelly getting ready to pass that mark. But that's still far short of where we've got to get to if we want to send humans to Mars, if we want to make that trek out to the red planet and come back. Skylab, you know, you look at that chart, Skylab is kind of the turning point. Skylab is the one exception prior to the space station that gives us that confidence that this is a thing that we can do. Next slide. So living there is more than just, you know, being launched up and put in a can and spending time in the void of space. It's a process of living in space the way we live on Earth, right? You've got to eat. They say that Skylab probably had some of the best space food before or since, because it was the first time they really kind of seriously took diet as a thing to be studied beyond just here's enough to keep you alive while you're up there. The picture in the bottom left there, I know the thing that keeps a lot of people from wanting to go to space is concern. You know, I'd kind of be interested in going to space. I find the idea interesting, but I'm concerned that I couldn't get proper dental care while I'm in space. That's the thing that keeps a lot of folks from going. Good news is, right, Skylab pioneered that. The Skylab crews were trained in dentistry. The picture down there in the bottom left is Dr. Joe Kerwin, the first medical doctor in space, performing a dental inspection on his commander Pete Conrad while he was there. In the top right, can you take a shower in space? You know, just one of the small creature comforts that we have on Earth. Can you take a shower in space? And the answer is yes, you can, but you probably don't want to. Skylab was launched with an onboard shower. Very unpopular. The crews just tried it out enough to verify that it did in fact work the way that it was planned, and validate that, yeah, you really don't want to use it. Exercise in the bottom right. You know, going into space, we knew that the longer that you're up there, you're losing bone mass, you're losing muscle mass. How bad is that? How catastrophic is that going to be the longer human beings are in space? And two, what can we do to mitigate that? What can we do to prevent the effects of that? Skylab becomes the foundation for being able to spend those much longer missions in space on the International Space Station. You know, astronaut Victor Glover on Crew 1. I read an interview with him just the other day where he was talking to Tom Cruise of all people, but he was saying that he gained muscle mass during his stay aboard the International Space Station, and that's all built on the foundation of what we learned on Skylab. Next slide. There's stuff to do. There's stuff to do. And I chose this picture for this slide just because I love that picture. I love the observation of the sun up against the black of space. But man, the heliophysics on Skylab, this was a big deal. You know, you go back to the big chronological book of spaceflight and human history, and you know, the sun is going to be one of the first discoveries. You know, the first human beings that didn't take them very long at all to look up. You know, man, that thing's bright. We learned pretty quickly it was there. We learned pretty quickly it was bright. You know, we learned that it generated heat. We learned kind of where it was. But so much of our understanding of the sun has really come in the last 50 years, and Skylab was a big turning point in that, not only understanding the sun itself, but through studying things like coronal mass ejections, beginning to give us a better understanding of the idea of space weather, right? Not just the sun, but the sun-Earth system, how the activity of that big star that we orbit affects our conditions, our climate, our atmosphere, and our life here on Earth. So it becomes a very big deal to do this science on Skylab. Next slide. So why does that matter? Why does that matter? Well, I mean, one, because if we're going to have a space station, if we're going to have an international space station, we're going to have people on it for a total of 30 years before it's all said and done. What's it up there for, right? We need to do science. We need to know that we're going to get useful results out of it. We need to know that there are things that we can do in that microgravity environment that we can't do anywhere else. So Skylab becomes the foundation for all of that. Skylab becomes the foundation for the Space Lab program on the space shuttle. Skylab becomes the foundation for the United States participation in the International Space Station. So there's that very real, very literal, very direct knowing that we can do science and knowing that it's worthwhile. But if we're going to Mars, right? If we're going to Mars, why does it matter? You talk to astronauts about the best parts of being in space, and of course you're going to get these are these are U.S. civil servants. It's a pleasure to serve my country. It's a pleasure to forward humanity's frontier. It's a pleasure to it's a privilege to do my duty. Okay, but what did you enjoy? And you're going to get two answers. You're going to get here, you're going to have folks talking about enjoying the microgravity of it. You're going to hear folks talk about Supermaning through the space station, floating around. But you're going to hear, I mean, almost to a person, this answer that includes the phrase shades of blue. They're going to talk about staring back at our planet beneath them, about studying the Earth through the windows. And that's kind of the thing that they keep gravitating towards. When there's free time, you kind of find your way back to those windows to stare down. Next slide. And if you're going to Mars, you've got, what, a week or two where you've got that beautiful cerulean globe out your window that you can see. And then you've got at the end, maybe a week where you have this rusty red ball growing in your window. And for the other, 7-something months, the view never changes. So if we're talking about sending astronauts into an environment where the thing that they most enjoy doing, the thing that kind of keeps them happy, keeps them sane, isn't there, how do you make up for it? And that idea of occupation, that idea of not only something to do, but something of merit, something worthwhile to do, becomes increasingly important. So the fact that Skylab showed us that you could give astronauts work that they would choose to do. The astronauts on Skylab, they would finish their duties for the day. It's now your free time. You can look out the window. You can read a book. A lot of them chose to, in their free time, continue to work because doing the work was rewarding in its own right. So that becomes a valuable lesson for filling those months in the endless void between Earth and Mars. Next slide. So what do they do? It kind of broke down into 5 general categories from left to right. I talked about the heliophysics. In addition to the heliophysics, they were doing astronomy. They were doing Earth observations. This is the first time that we have people long-term in orbit around Earth doing observations of the Earth. There's a story that I love that unfortunately I can't document. If anybody's seen the documentation of this, please let me know. But that Skylab actually helped locate natural resources in Utah that were more valuable than the cost of the Skylab program. I mean, that one find, it paid for itself. Folks ask, is this whole space thing worth it? Yeah, I mean, it kind of is. Second picture, they predicted the future with what's that? Cybertech crystal ball. Not the word that I'm looking for. No, this was part of the biomedical. What happens to human beings when they spend that much time in space? How does the body adjust? How does the body adapt? What does that environment do to the body, and what does that mean for when you come home? The picture there is the vestibular experiment. Space sickness was known to be a thing, right? Astronauts, going back to Apollo 9, were becoming disoriented, were becoming nauseous from exposure to the microgravity environment. If we're going to be flying a space shuttle, right, and somebody's going to have to land the thing, you can't have them throwing up while they're doing it. So we've got to get a better understanding of this and how to mitigate it. Middle picture, materials science. an entire package of just materials flown on Skylab to determine how the microgravity environment affects the way that the basic material physics functions. Next picture, the most famous of the student experiments was Anita and Arabella, the spiders that they took up to Skylab to see how they would spin their webs in the microgravity environment, how that would affect just the day-to-day activity for the spiders. But those were just the most famous of the students package. There was an entire package of experiments proposed by students that were flown on Skylab. On the far right, the MMU, the Buck Rogers backpack that was flown for a couple of years on the space shuttle, was, before it was used on space shuttle, tested out inside Skylab, because Skylab had a volume large enough that you could fly a jetpack around inside the space station. And so there was a lot of technology demonstration that occurred on Skylab, just testing out these systems while we had this unique opportunity in Earth orbit. Next slide. And I'll mention just really quickly, y'all may have noticed the panel that Owen Garrett was working at, the Apollo telescope mount control panel in that last slide. If you have a keen eye, you may have seen that and said, that looks kind of familiar. Where else have I seen that? Next slide. The answer is the Millennium Falcon. When they were designing the Millennium Falcon for Star Wars, they copied the Apollo telescope mount control panel as one of the controls in the Millennium Falcon. Next slide. So increasingly, this is kind of a point that that becomes important, and that is, there's more to life than living. It's great that the astronauts can live there. I mean, that they can survive there, that you can have day-to-day life there. It is great that that there are things to do. It's great that you can do productive work in space. But again, if we're talking about long duration missions, if we're talking about long duration missions to other worlds, if we're talking about long duration missions through the void of space, there's more to life than living. And Skylab, that becomes a lesson that Skylab taught us. I was interviewed recently for whatever reason. A weird part of having written a book about Skylab is that I get way more calls than I ever would have expected. People wanting to talk to me about whether there was a mutiny in space back before I was even born. You may have heard this. There's a story. There's a myth, an urban legend that the third crew of Skylab went on strike, that they had a mutiny, that they took a day off, didn't answer the radio. Utterly untrue. If you've heard this, please, please, please don't pass it on. Please, please, please help put it to rest. There are some elements of truth that contribute to the story, like any good story like that. But the story itself is not true. You can do some research. John Urey is the historian at Johnson Space Center. He's done a great article kind of trying to put that urban legend to death. But one of the better interviews that I got to do about that with Supercluster kind of got into this tangent of Skylab was the first time that astronaut happiness was even a thing, right? You know, the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo missions were entirely designed around mission success. Skylab becomes the first time that is it going to be pleasant becomes a topic. NASA brought in Raymond Loewy, the famed industrial designer. Everything from Studebaker cars to the shape of the Coke bottle as you know it is the work of Raymond Loewy. Brought him in to hey, look, we're building this space station. We want to make it livable. Do you have any advice for us? And out of that comes we might should have a window in it, right? You know, from a structural engineering standpoint. Taking a pressure vessel and poking a hole in it is really not a great idea. I mean, that's less than optimal. But this is a place that human beings are going to have to live for months at a time. Yeah, we probably need to do that. Skylab had the largest open volume that has ever flown in space. And so it was a place where the astronauts could enjoy being. They loved running around the locker rings. You could actually run the circumference of those lockers that you see there until Mission Control finally told them to stop because it was vibrating the space station. And if you're trying to do microgravity science, imparting loads to the experiments that are supposed to be loadless kind of defeats the purpose. But that's a thing as we work on these systems, and this is a thing as this workshop ends. Those of you who are doing work related to human spaceflight, not only does it work, but is it livable? Is it pleasant? Is a thing that we've got to carry with us as we're turning our eyes farther into the solar system. Next slide. You can fix things. So the patch there at the top left, that's Skylab the way it was supposed to look. You'll notice that it has 2 solar array wings. It was supposed to have 2 solar array wings. You'll notice that the little Paris or the sail that's on the top of the workshop is not on the patch, because the picture of Skylab that you see is not the way that Skylab was supposed to look. Skylab is launched from the ground. It is a beautiful launch. I talked to folks that were watching it. Man, that was an incredible day. It was an awesome sight. For the folks in the control room, less of a great day. Pretty quickly, data coming in that things are not the way they should be. Anomalous telemetry is coming in. Long story short, during launch, airflow gets between the structure of the workshop itself, the structure of the stage itself, and the micrometeoroid shield that surrounded it, that's also served as a thermal shield. The airflow, the aerodynamics ripped the shield away. In the process, that freed the solar array wings. They started to deploy. One of them deployed completely and was ripped off by aerodynamic forces during ascent. The other one, a piece of the heat shield wrapped around it, prevented it from deploying it. On the plus side, that saved it, possibly saved the Skylab program. On the downside, it meant that for the time being, when the space station arrived in orbit, the array wing was stuck, couldn't be deployed. Skylab has a fraction of the electric power that it was supposed to have, because it's still drawing power from the little windmill solar arrays on the telescope. But those were designed just to power the telescope. They're not designed to power the entire space station. It's working, but it's not optimal. It's not what they need to do to perform the missions. At the same time, without the heat shield, without the debris shield, the station is overheating. So they're having to do everything they can in those initial days to put it in a roll, to change the orientation, to keep the heat under control. The first crew was supposed to launch the day after the space station. They ended up taking 10 days to come up with solutions to fix the space station before they finally launched the first crew. You think about it now, 10 days to save a space station is phenomenal. And yet they did it. That bottom left patch is a tribute to what a big deal that was. Saving Skylab required hardware to be developed on the ground. It required the astronauts on orbit to perform spacewalks, to do repairs, to free that solar array wing. So the patch that you see on the bottom left, anytime an astronaut goes for a spacewalk wearing a US spacesuit, they're wearing that patch. Today, that patch has 5 stars. Originally, it had 3. The first design of the patch before the space shuttle era had 3, or I guess at the beginning of the space shuttle era had 3 stars. One was for Ed White making the first U.S. spacewalk. That's kind of an important spacewalk, doing it for the first time. So Ed White gets a star. The second star is for 2 guys named Neil and Buzz. I mean, they weren't even in space. They were on a planetary body, but even so, they get a star for making the first footsteps on the moon. The third star is for Joe Kerwin and Pete Conrad performing the first spacewalk that they did to repair Skylab. At the time that the patch was made, NASA considered that spacewalk to save Skylab of equal importance with the first spacewalk and the first human footsteps on another world. It was kind of a big deal. And historically it was. The experience that we got from Skylab, that was the first time that a spacewalk was conducted that wasn't part of the initial plan. It's the first time that they're really having to improvise during a spacewalk. So our experience with Hubble, it largely derives from our work with Skylab. The International Space Station required just an insane number of spacewalks very quickly. It required more spacewalks than the U.S. and Russia, the Soviet Union, had performed, in all of their history prior to the ISS. And from the U.S. side, a lot of that's based on the knowledge, the experience, the confidence that we gained from Skylab. Next slide. Why does it matter? Well, one, because as we talk about exploration, as we talk about going to the moon, as we talk about going to Mars, a lot of the architectures are using modular approaches. They're using EELV or ELV class vehicles to launch the elements that are going to have to either be assembled or assemble themselves in space. That idea that you can do that sort of repair, that you can do that sort of meaningful work in space, there is confidence today that can be done. That dates back originally to the work done on Skylab. Next slide. Why does that matter? So this was a story came out October 2008. It's not the only time this story has come out, right? Already in this story, it's again, and in the 14 years since October 10th, 2008, again is again. But I remember when this one dropped, and I remember, I think Letterman and Leno were still had their shows at the time, and they're having great fun with it. I mean, it's a joke. But if humanity is serious about exploration, if we're serious about long duration missions to the moon, if we're talking serious about long duration missions to Mars, where you can't just easily launch new parts when something breaks, if we're serious about that, then if the only thing that happened on the International Space Station was the space station toilet broke and broke again and broke again, it becomes worth it, right? Because like I said, you can't launch new parts to catch up with a space toilet on its way to Mars. And so if you're on your way to Mars on an 8-month journey to the red planet, going to be there for some amount of time, a 6 to 8 month journey back, and your toilet breaks on week 2 and you can't repair it, it's going to be a long trip. I mean, like that is going to be a long, unpleasant trip. So if all we do between now and then is figure out every way that a space toilet can break, and every way that you can repair a broken space toilet, and every way that every part that you need in order to do every way that you can repair a space toilet, every way that it can break, and because we're living in the future, every way that you can 3D print every part that you need to repair, for every repair for every broken space toilet, it becomes worth it. And that idea of repair, that idea that you really can do meaningful work fixing hardware in space, goes back to Skylab. Next slide. So the picture on the left is broken Skylab. The picture on the left shows the heat shield ripped away before the parasol was deployed. Shows the solar array wing that's stuck in place. A meeting had been held. Weeks before launch. And one of the things that was discussed was what do you do? What do you do if there's a problem on the outside of the workshop? If there's if something is wrong on the exterior of the workshop, what do? You can't access it from the inside of the vehicle. Skylab was designed for spacewalks. I mean, from the outset, like I said, it's got a hatch, it's got an airlock module, it's got that little Jiminy door. But it's designed for spacewalks to the Apollo telescope mount, because this is back in the olden days, right? Nothing was digital. It was doing its heliophysics and its astronomy observations, Earth observations using film. Well, if you're going to have a lot of people up in space for a long time shooting a lot of pictures on film, you've got to be able to change the film. So Skylab was designed so that the astronauts could go out the airlock module through that little Hitt Jiminy hatch, go up through a series of ladders and handholds up to the top of the telescope mount, take out the old film, put in new film, bring the old film back inside, and bring it back down to Earth with them when they return home. Designed for spacewalks to the telescope. The outside of the workshop is not designed for access. There are no handholds, no footholds, no translation aids, no easy way to get to the outside of the workshop. So the discussion is held. Well, what do we do? And the answer was nothing. There is no way to access the outside of the workshop. Now we feel okay with that, or we feel like the risks of something going wrong on the outside of the workshop that could potentially be critical to the mission is sufficiently low that that it's okay that there's no access to the exterior of the workshop, but you can't do it. Well, Skylab launches and something goes wrong on the exterior of the workshop. The entire exterior of the workshop is gone. The heat shield, the debris shield is missing. The thermal protection is gone. The array that's mounted to the side of the workshop is stuck. Can't be deployed. Something is wrong on the outside of the workshop. This is the unsolvable problem. This is the thing that you can't do anything about. The people are brought back in. And let's talk about this some more. And this time, to quote Gene Kranz, failure is not an option, right? You can't do it is no longer an option. And so they begin the process of discussing how do we fix the problems on the outside of the workshop. You've got two problems. You got the heat shields gone. You've got the solar array wing is gone. You got to fix both of those things. They're not gone, but stuck. You got to fix both of those things. So the efforts begin in parallel, developing that. Multiple efforts begin in parallel to solve both of those problems. Jack Kinsler at Johnson Space Center comes up with the idea of the parasol. Skylab had a science airlock mounted to the workshop. It was just a very small airlock that could be used to deploy material samples out to the exterior into the space environment. His idea was, let's literally just stick an umbrella out through that. We're gonna have an umbrella. It's gonna be stowed like an umbrella is. We're gonna stick it out. We're gonna deploy it. It's gonna pop open. That's gonna be our heat shield. At the same time, Marshall Space Flight Center is working on this idea they call the solar sail. It's a sail. You've got two long poles, two long beams. You're going to have a sail between them. Jack Kinsler's idea did not require a spacewalk. The Marshall idea did. We're going to go with Jack Kinsler's idea first. So the first crew goes up. They deploy the JSC parasol. It works. It provides protection during that first mission. It begins to degrade towards the end and afterward, so that the second crew did end up having to deploy the Marshall solar sail that lasted for the duration of the crew time of Skylab. But so you've got those going on. What do we do about this stuck array wing? Somebody's going to have to be outside, and they're going to have to fix it. And the initial plan was, well, could we just fly the command module up to it and clip it? And the answer was no. You couldn't get sufficient purchase in a spacecraft floating beside a spacecraft to clip it, to get enough leverage to clip it. So they're going to have to do an EVA. They're going to have to do a full up EVA out of that airlock. They're going to have to access part of the space station that wasn't designed to be accessed. So these other two pictures here are my favorite parts of that story. Saving Skylab is a documentary that came out a couple of years ago. To do that EVA, you've got to have tools, right? You got to have something to clip the thing, and you got to have something that can reach. The airlock is at one end of the workshop. The piece of metal that's caught the array is towards the other end. So you got to have a way to reach from the one to the other. Somebody says, hey, the limb loppers, the folks that cut trees, have long clippers like that. So they call a company in Centralia, Missouri, the AB Chance company. You have a limb lopper that we could use. Cutting the story way down, a guy that works at AB Chance named Cliff Bosch ends up being picked up on the personal jet of the head of McDonnell Douglas, who flies him down to Marshall with a big box full of tools. Doesn't even tell his wife that he's leaving. They say, well, we got to go down to Kennedy to see if these will actually fit on the spacecraft. Hey, I'll come with you. Calls his wife, says, hey, look, I'm not going to be home. Flies down to Kennedy. She ships him some clothes, and he ends up, just wakes up one morning to go to work at his lineman tool company, and ends up helping to save a space station. AB Chance got purchased today. They're a part of Hubble Systems. They 2 years ago did a story about their guy Cliff Bosch. He's passed away now, and his role in saving Skylab. And it's a beautiful story of, Joe and Pete get the credit. They're the ones that get the star on the EVA patch. But it was not only a NASA-wide effort, it was a nationwide effort, saving that space station. In the process of working on saving Skylab, talked with a gentleman here in town, Chuck Lewis. He was one of the Marshall engineers who was part of that effort. It turns out he still had the tool that Cliff Bosch brought to Huntsville. So I got to hold this is not the one that was flown, but it was the one that came to Huntsville that made it possible to save Skylab. So there's me very very proudly holding the lineman tool that helped save our first space station. But like I said, it was a nationwide effort. My co-author Owen Garriott used to say that Apollo 13 is remembered as one of NASA's greatest moments. Owen says, it was without question one of the greatest moments for the astronaut office, one of the greatest moments for mission control, one of the greatest moments for Johnson Space Center. But it was kind of a localized great moment. That saving Skylab was for the agency, for the nation, possibly a greater moment than Apollo 13. Running low on time. Next slide. So those are the lessons, right? We forget that that there was ever a time that we didn't know what it would be like to try and live in space for 84 days at a time. Living in a time when we have astronauts that are approaching the 1 year mark, we kind of take for granted that Skylab taught us that you can live there. 21 years of continuous science operations. There have been, approaching 3,000 scientific publications that have come out of research out of the International Space Station. I mean, it's producing science. It's not only on changing our understanding of the environment up there. It's producing science that's changing lives, improving lives down here on Earth. We kind of take for granted that there was ever a time that we didn't know that Skylab had to teach us that. You can fix things, right? In an era of Hubble, of an era of the International Space Station, we forget that there was ever a time that we didn't know that, hey, if something goes wrong, you can just, go outside and fix it. Skylab taught us that. So the lessons that we learned not only have paved the way for everything that we're doing now, but will pave the way for the greater adventures yet to come. Next slide. And and so that's the takeaway that I give to the teachers, and that's the takeaway that I'll give to you. Why do they care? Why do they care about the space station 48 years ago? I talked about this about Skylab like it's a story, and that's like there is a Skylab story. The title of the book, Homesteading Space, the Skylab story. And it's not true, right? I talked about Skylab like there was a Skylab story, and I talked about Mars like there was a Mars story. But the reality is these are all just chapters in one story. It's all one continuing adventure from Gagarin and Shepard through Apollo and the moon landings, through Skylab and Salyut and Apollo Soyuz into the space shuttle and on into the International Space Station, and now into Artemis and then I was about to say ultimately onto Mars, but even Mars is just a stepping stone. And so if you're on this call, then you're part of that story. Leland Ballou was the Skylab program manager at Marshall. This is his quote: "Represented the dogged determination of men to achieve their goal." And that, it would have been so easy to lose that program. It would have been so easy to lose that program. But in the shadow of the moon landings and as NASA was working to accomplish, one of the greatest accomplishments in human history, there was this team with dogged determination that gave us our first space station and saved it when we had nearly every right to lose it. It's that same dogged determination of men and women to achieve their goal that's going to get us to the moon and ultimately get us on to Mars. So for all you do to make that possible, thank you. And with that, I've got I guess, a few minutes if there are any questions.
Yep, looks like we have about 10 minutes for questions. David, thank you so much. Looking at the Q&A here on Zoom, so if you have any questions, please submit them and upvote any that you find interesting, and I'll read them off as we get to them. So the first question is what do the final 2 stars on the EVA patch stand for?
Oh, yeah. So I skipped that. So at some point well into the, into this century, 2 more stars were added. One was for the first spacewalk out of the space shuttle. The other was for the first spacewalk out of the space station. So those are that's what brought it up to 5. Back during the Constellation program, a version was drafted up with a 6th star for the first Constellation spacewalk. They've gone back to the 5 stars. Looking forward to the day that we see a 6th star added, but not quite there yet. So that's the other 2 stars.
All right. The next question is what will the 6th star be?
So great question, right? I mean, so is it going to be the first Gateway spacewalk, the next steps on the moon? I with y'all eagerly look forward to finding out.
All right. Since I don't see any other questions in the Q&A just yet, I'm going to ask one of my own.
All right.
So in all of the amazing learnings that Skylab had, what do you think was the most surprising to the Skylab team? The most unexpected thing that was learned from Skylab?
Oh gosh, the most unexpected probably would be, I made reference to the fact there's kind of this myth that there was a strike, this myth that there was a mutiny. Made reference to the fact that there is a little bit of truth to that, and I think that would be it, right? I think there was some like I said, the heliophysics. There was stuff that they learned about the behavior of the sun that hadn't been fully appreciated yet. But they kind of at least knew what they were going to look for, right? For most of the lessons of Skylab, they kind of knew what they were going to look for. I don't think anybody really knew that they were going to end up with this situation with the 3rd crew, where things were going to be quite that tense. I think as scientists, as engineers, science makes sense. Engineering makes sense. Human behavior is that's complicated. That's hard. It's not rocket science, right? So that understanding of, hey, we if we're going to do these long duration missions, we really need to think differently about the way we plan the missions, about the interactions between the crew and the ground, about the way that we schedule things. That we've got to get smarter about, like I said, about human behavior and about workforce dynamics in a way that we haven't been. So I think that was possibly the surprise takeaway of Skylab.
Okay. Next question is how do you see commercial space impacting these chapters going forward? Do you see significant differences in motivation?
I am here today as the author of Homesteading Space. I am speaking only as somebody who has written books about the history of the space program. From that perspective, looking in, gosh, I mean, is that still a question? Is there still a present or future of space flight that isn't about that and story? I mean, you're seeing it. If you watch the International Space Station, every time every time an astronaut goes up to the International Space Station, it's informed by that and story. It's the only way that we do LEO now. We're on the verge of, in just over 2 months, seeing the Axiom 1 crew fly up to ISS, and that's going to be another giant yet tiny change in how it works. I mean, functionally, this is a crew getting on a SpaceX Dragon the way that crews do, flying it up to the International Space Station the way that astronauts do to perform research, the way that astronauts do. If you weren't looking at the labels, this is a tiny change. If you're looking at the labels, this is a sea change. This is I grew up watching a 2001 Space Odyssey, right? And and the focus is all the monoliths and the Star Child and my God, it's full of stars and all these things. But that beginning part, right? That beginning part where you've got the Pan Am flight going up to the little wheel with the Hilton Hotel. How do you get there? Like that part, for years, that part seemed harder than the rest of it. And yet we're there, right? Like I'm not feeling good about Pan Am. I don't know. I don't know that we're going to see their logo on the spacecraft. But in so many ways, AX-1 is that flight. In a couple of years, you can see them launching the commercial segment of the International Space Station. It's not going to be Pan Am, but they have baked Hilton cookies on the International Space Station. So Hilton, like they really are doing it. So we're there. So what does it look like? What does that commercial future look like? It looks exactly the same, and it looks completely different. I mean, just like Leo, right?
All right. Next question from Travis Christian. What was it that made the Skylab crew not want to use the shower?
It's not worth it. So you had your big hula hoops with your shower curtain, and you had to raise it up, and you got your little spray, and you can spray your water around, and the hula hoops and the shower curtain contain the water. But the reality is, the benefit of doing that versus just toweling off the way they do on space station. At the end of the day, the experience wasn't worth the effort that you had to put in.
Okay. And another question from Ingolf Steinbach. What's more challenging with regards to going to Mars, the technology or the psychological aspects?
Okay, as somebody who can do neither, that's easy for me to answer, because I'm not having to build the spaceships or deal with the crew psychology. I will say though, in terms of which is harder, it's the same answer as what I said about the most surprising lesson of Skylab being the issues with the third crew. You can verify and validate a spacecraft, right? The technology, we kind of understand the technological challenges, and because we kind of understand the technological challenges, we kind of understand the requirements for meeting those challenges, and because we kind of understand the requirements, we kind of understand how to, like I said, how to verify and validate the technology to ensure that it's going to be able to meet that. Man, verifying and validating crew behavior, crew psychology in an environment that no human being has ever been in before. You can simulate and you can do analogs, but how reliable is your model when it comes to that? I mean, you could put somebody in a can and you can seal off the window so that they can't see anything, but they know that they're still on Earth, right? What are the surprises that we won't fully appreciate until folks are in that environment? So, the unknown is always the hard part. The unknown is always the scary part, and I feel like the unknowns of the crew part are the greater unknowns than the unknowns of the technical part.
Okay. Time for just a few more questions. Next one is, Skylab required astronauts to train on how to use all the different facilities in it. How long before an everyday person could intuitively perform all those same functions without much training? Would you say that's part of what we learned from Skylab?
Oh gosh, no, I don't think that's part of what we learned from Skylab, because again, we weren't thinking that way yet, right? I mean, it's really only been with the well, no, so I take that back. I'm speaking out of school, because I am also David Hitt, author of Bold They Rise, the space shuttle early years, and for all that that we like to act like commercial space is a new thing. The reality is, commercial human space flight began back in 1983, right? We were flying payload specialists on the space shuttle on commercial missions, from almost the very beginning of the space shuttle program, and that's what they were. They were people who had, whether they were normal people or everyday people or whatever the question was, but there were people who had backgrounds in very specific areas who had to be brought up to speed to, hey, go do science on a spacecraft in orbit. And you know, they had to go through some, you know, limited amount of training to do that. The decision to do that predated the first flights of the space shuttle. So, you know, I can't imagine that it wasn't at least somewhat informed by the experiences of Skylab that gave the confidence that, that yeah, we feel like we could take a specialist from a particular field, from industry, and put them in space, and things go okay.
All right, wonderful. I think we're out of time now. Thank you so much, David, for the wonderful talk and all of the lessons learned.
So, well, thank you so much. Like I said, pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.